guest today guides introverted women to be seen, heard, and respected by embracing their awesome. She's a trusted speaker for Fortune 500 companies and top tier organizations, as well as an international best-selling author delivering motivational yet practical guidance to emerging and established leaders. She's shared the stage with names like Lisa Nichols, JJ Version, Esther Perel, and Marissa Peer. Please welcome Jacqueline to the show. Hey, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. I'm excited.
I know, I'm excited too. I'm excited to talk about your exciting topic, the excited introvert. Because I think there's a lot of us women business owners out there that are very introverted, and I think this is something that people are really going to benefit from. So let's dive into it. How did you learn how to come out of your shell?
Well, it's an interesting thing. For me, I've known from a very early age what I wanted to do and accomplish in life. Like, I'm that weird kid who, instead of being like in kindergarten, wanting to be a firefighter or a doctor, I wanted to be a New York Times bestselling author. That was my aspiration at 5. So I'm a little off center as far as like being very clear, but that was a key component in me really leveraging my introversion. I recognized fairly early on in high school, actually, that if I wanted to be that person in my mind, and I saw myself on international stages, I saw myself writing books, I saw myself doing all these things. If I am that person that I envision, I have to do the things that person would do. So a speaker has to speak in front of people. A writer has to write and let other people see it. And that was really the shift. That was the defining moment where it was like, if I were just to be this person who's in my mind, who would that be? What would I do? How would I operate? And it started just as a test. Like, let me just test this out. Let me see how this goes. And as I allowed myself to be the person, the mind me, as I call it, as I leaned into that mind me, who is introverted and is also influential, who loves helping people and also wants to be left alone. I'm all of those things. As I began to lean into that, opportunities presented themselves. And so it was only as I decided to be me, not someone else, that all of these things that I've accomplished have really been able to unfold.
That's amazing. I think so many of us too, it's like one of those things where it's like you do want to get up and do these amazing things, but at the same time, you also want to be left alone. I love that. That is so funny
Yes.
because I feel like
Yeah.
that matches up with so many of us who like want to change the world, but at the same time also want to wear sweats and, drink coffee and read a book.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the work that I do, my purpose is kind of two-pronged. One is just to shift the notion of what introverts are. I don't know for yourself, but I know for me, I for a long time, and honestly, even today, don't identify with the term introvert, because that term conjures up things that I am not. When someone hears the word introvert, it typically they're talking about someone who's shy, who is quiet, who's bashful, who's antisocial, and I'm none of those things. And none of those things have anything to do with being introverted. You can be antisocial and extroverted. You can be an extrovert who has social anxiety, and so having to engage with people is an issue for you. So these are two completely separate things, but it's often that they're entangled. An introvert is just the term for someone who processes stimulation internally. That's it. There's no all of this other nonsense. Like, I don't know who's doing the PR for introvert. But they need to be fired because they have gotten it so off base. And so, much to your point, for those of us who do like to engage people in doses, who are very much aligned with being front and center, but we need to recover after that, where we are in a space, we're taking in like the entire world and trying to mentally juggle what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're feeling, how we should respond to that, if we should respond. We're doing all of these mental gymnastics just at the store. Like, it's not even a high stakes situation, but we don't have a term that really addresses that. Introvert has never addressed that, but that's what an introvert is. And so this kind of dynamic is part and parcel of my work, is shifting that whole narrative and that whole perspective. Um, there's another thing I wanted to pop on just really quickly. A lot of people have this notion, because of this kind of misconception about introverts, that if you're going to be successful, you have to not be an introvert. We're always told you need to get out of your shell. You just need to stop being an introvert. You need to be more extroverted, so on and so forth. One, that's not helpful advice. Two, that's impossible because of the ways that our brains are wired towards introversion versus towards extroversion or ambiversion, which is somewhere in the middle. But lastly, if we are denying our introversion or we're trying to diminish it, then we can't bring our gifts to the world. The world needs someone who has insight, who is observative, who dives deep into mastery of a topic, who is able to bring in collaboratively people who are bringing all sorts of skills. We need that. Like, the world needs that. Your world needs that. And so if you are trying to be the center of attention or the loudest one in the room or the life of the party, you're so busy focused on that outward expression that's not you, that you can't bring the gifts that you need to bring. We have enough people who innately are extroverted. We need our introverts to bring those skills and to bring those talents and those quirks of introversion to the forefront so that we all can benefit.
I'm so glad that you brought that up because I think that there is a big misconception between like you're either one or the other, but there's so many
Right.
times that we can be both or one or I mean it's just amazing, which is why I'm so excited that you're here because I think there's so many people that think that they have to fit into one bucket or the other. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges facing business leaders. How do you think that we could help overcome that?
Well, first of all, recognizing that it's not an either or game. Introversion and extroversion are just two sides of a spectrum. No one is purely one or the other. Now, you can have a lot of tendencies of one or a lot of tendencies of the other, but we are all shades of gray on that spectrum. And so, this kind of duality, this false duality of you're either an introvert, which means like you don't like people and you're going to sulk in the corner, or you're an extrovert, you're the life of the party and you lead everything. Those two things, one, don't have anything to do with how you're processing. It's an internal versus external processing of stimulation in your world. But also, if we're only looking at it as either this or that, it leaves this whole gradient of skills and abilities that are not being brought to the forefront. And because you assume, oh, if you take an extra beat to respond, well, you're not paying attention. You're not engaged. Somehow you are less valuable. Completely false. Our brains need to sort through all of these various components that we're taking in. And that's why for many introverts, when introverts are showing up and they are speaking out, what they have to say is insightful, it's beneficial. They're bringing up all of these sort of nuanced points and facets that you would not have thought of. That's because that's how our brains are wired. We sort through and sift through all of these different layers. And then once we've reached a conclusion, then we're able to present it. This is more or less the opposite of extroverts who need to engage their world. They need to talk it out. They need to move around. They have to have that outside engagement in order to process what's happening. And so if we're only looking at things from an either or perspective, you're leaving out so much talent, so much ability. And honestly, it's just frustrating.
Absolutely. Yeah, because if you're an introverted business owner, how do you embrace your awesomeness and come out of your shell and be seen?
Well, it really It comes down to, I have what I call the awe approach. So the first thing is for you to acknowledge that your introversion is a gift. It is not a detriment. That's first and foremost. Even as a business owner, if you're looking at your introversion as something you need to get over or that you need to fix, your focus is on the wrong thing, because those skills and those quirks and that nuance that you can uniquely bring is not getting to your customers. That's first. The second piece is for what I call for you to leverage your insights into income. So how do you take that nuanced approach that you are naturally inclined toward, that introspection, that insight? How do you take that and weave it through what you're offering? That could be through the services that you offer, through the products that you offer, how you are engaging even your community. These are all ways that introverts are uniquely built and tasked to bring that insight into a way that is profitable, of course, but also adds value as you're creating profit. And then that last piece is to really examine, why are you saying yes and who are you trying to be? Again, if we are focused on trying to change our introverted nature into something else, that means less energy, which we only had that much. When it comes to other people, we only have this much energy. If you're spending if you have like an inch of energy and you're spending 2/3 of that inch towards being someone you're not, that means that you're only leaving a third for your customers. You need to, at minimum, flip that, because we need you to show up and we need you to be aligned. If you are saying yes to products, to services, to techniques, to methods that do not suit you, you will not, one, do it. Two, you will not be consistent about it. And three, you are going to be so resentful behind the scenes that that whole vibe gets tainted, even if it's something that's beneficial to your customers or clients.
I love that your message really talks about how being introverted can be a strength. And it's usually the opposite. Like people always feel like, oh, if you're extroverted, all these things. But I really think that being an introvert is awesome. And I'd love to hear, like, I know you work with a ton of people about using it as their strength. So tell me a little bit more about what that looks like.
Sure. So I'll point to some very like high level examples, because I think that will best illuminate this. So if you think of someone like Beyonce, Beyonce is an introvert. She is a very vocal about her introversion and about how that has supported her. Now, one, people think, how on earth could Beyonce be an introvert? Like, how is that even, what bizarro world is this? She has mentioned time and time again throughout her career how her introverted nature, her introspection allows her to write songs that are some of the biggest ones. It informs how she is able to even deliver on her skill and her calling, her zone of genius. Her being able to assign what her technique, and I mentioned this in my book, Yes, Introverts Can, how she uses the assign and delegate technique when she needs to be outward facing. She needs to be like performing, she is doing interviews, she's doing all the extrovert things. She assigns that to her empowered alter ego, Sasha Fierce. Sasha Fierce was created to be that forward face. Now, Sasha Fierce is not like quite like a Clark Kent Superman type situation. Sasha Fierce is the embodiment of those outward facing things for Beyonce. So when Beyonce wants to feel empowered and she wants to feel sexy and she wants to feel vivacious and energetic, she taps in Sasha. Sasha is the one that we see performing on stage. Sasha is the one that we see with the hair like blowing back in the fan. When Sasha has done her thing with the people, Sasha steps off the stage, hands the keys back to Beyonce, and Beyonce goes back, puts on her sweats, and like is a recluse. Many people don't recognize this, but this technique is how she is able to set boundaries for herself so that she has the time and space to be quiet, to reflect, to use that insight and that observation. That it's also the way that she is able to have herself to be in service, where she is ambitious and she's powerful and she's successful, And also, she is an introvert who needs solitude and who needs to reflect. She's both and, not either or. And I think she's a very powerful example. And there's so many other women. Naomi Osaka is another one who very powerful, very upfront, very open about her introversion. Emma Watson, another one, very open about her introversion and how that has supported her. For Emma, she uses her platform of acting to be a way for her to give back to the community in philanthropic efforts. It's not that she's in front because she's an actress. She wanted to get a platform to be able to change the world. Acting just happened to be the one that best suited her. So these are some ways that very powerful women who names that we know, people we see very much in the public eye, and yet they are using their introversion so that they can be successful, not putting their introversion to the side to somehow fix or flip so that they can be successful.
Now, I know that you talk a lot more about this in your book, but tell us, like, what are some ways to find our own Sasha Fierce? Like, how do we go about that? Because in business, you're right, there's so many different things that we're looking at. Sometimes we're in front and sometimes we're not.
Absolutely. Well, I give, and this will be in the show notes too. I'll give you an actual step-by-step guide for what Beyonce does to tap into her Sasha Fierce. But here's a quick rundown. First of all, you need to imagine what are those traits and those tasks that you want to delegate. So what's the stuff that's out in front that you don't want to deal with, but you kind of got to deal with because you're the boss. So what are those tasks that you would want to delegate out to your empowered alter ego? Next, you want to think about what are those emotions? What are those things that you would feel or want to experience through this empowered alter ego? So again, let me tap into Beyonce. When she said that she created Sasha because she would get such stage fright when she was earlier on in her career, and she wanted to feel very confident and she wanted to feel very sexy. And so those were the traits that she wanted Sasha to embody. So for you, what are those traits that you want your empowered alter ego to embody? Lastly, you want to create a name for that empowered alter ego. This needs to be a name that speaks to you and it conjures up those emotions. It conjures up that experience. For Beyonce, Sasha Fierce was a very deliberate name. She says that Sasha she chose because all of the Sashas that she knew, they were like, I take no prisoners. I will not take any crap. I am coming here to do a thing, and hell or high water, it's going to get done. The fierce part was the portion of it that was the very sexy and vivacious, where she is not only beautiful and she's strong, but she owns that in its totality. So for her, Sasha Fierce was a very deliberate name. When she hears Sasha Fierce, it conjures up those emotions. So she can immediately be that person. She can be that alter ego. So for you, what is the name that conjures up those emotions that you talked about? And then the last kind of like 3B of that is for you to put it into action. It makes no difference if you do all of this and you don't implement. So where is a place that you can test the waters? It can be something as simple like, I don't know about all of this. Let me just tap my whatever name that you have. For me, it's Catherine. So let me just tap my Catherine while I'm at the grocery store. Catherine is, we don't have enough time for Catherine, but Catherine is the type of person who would go to the grocery store to get like bread and milk and like pumps and sequins and a bold lip, big sunglasses, and would stroll like money. And she's in like Aldi or like Dollar Tree, but she comes into the place with such presence. So who is that person and where can you tap into that? Maybe it is at Dollar Tree. Maybe it is at the grocery store. Maybe it's at some small, low stakes place where you can test the waters. But as you're beginning to exercise and put that alter ego into action, you'll see more and more how opportunities begin to present themselves to you.
That is amazing. And I like the tactic of being able to like test the waters. I think that's awesome. Now, I have a favorite question that I always ask every single guest who's on my podcast, and I think your answer is just going to be amazing. So I can't wait to hear it. But if you could give one piece of advice to a small business owner, what would it be?
It would be for you to recognize that introversion is not a flaw to fix or an obstacle to overcome. It is, in fact, an invitation for you to live deeply and impact greatly. So embrace your awesome and do it.
I love it. Now, I know that you're a very busy woman. You've got all sorts of stuff going on. So tell me, where can our listeners find out more about your work?
You can always find out anything at my home base, iembraceawesome.com. That is my website that has information about my goings on, my work, and just in general. Across the social verse, you can find me at JK Shaulis. If you see JK Shaulis, it's me. And that website again is iembraceawesome.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I feel like this conversation is going to reach so many people, and there's so many people that are going to be able to find that person within themselves to take on such an amazing role and honestly push their business forward. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to visit with us today.